Hello friends, in today's video we're going to be discussing reverse proxy with YARP. We're going to be discussing how we can actually utilize it, why do we need it, and how we can build it within our .NET Web APIs. We're going to be delving into the configuration of it and how we can actually wire it up to current microservices. I am Mohamad, and if you want to learn more about .NET, Azure, and AWS, please make sure you like and subscribe. It will really help the channel. Now, let's jump into the code. So what I currently have here is I have a simple implementation about an F1 shop, which is basically an e-commerce shop. So we're going to call it F1 shop. And this commerce shop basically have a front end, has an order API, payments API, and a users API. So before we actually jump into the code, what we want to do is we want to understand why do we need it and how we can actually see it in place, and then we can jump into the code and implement it. So in this example here, I have a front end, and we can say this front end is built, for example, on React, and I have my normal web APIs running. So right now, if for example, my front end wants to communicate with the order APIs, my front end will need to know the exact address of my orders API in order for it to communicate with it. Similarly, if my front end wants to communicate with my payments API, it needs to know the full address for it. And if I want to communicate with users, same story, it will need to know the full address. So in this example right here, what do I have? So this could be, for example, hosted on, let's say, users.api, f1api.com, something like that. Payments will be on payments, for example, and orders will be on orders. So as you can see from the get-go, in order for me to have this up and running, I need to have 3 different domains that my front end will need to know about. And these 3 different domains will need to be stored in my front end in order for it to be utilized by it. So here, for example, this front end will need to manage these 3 different domains. So what happened, for example, if I want to add a new service? When I add a new service, for example, say this emails, for any reason, emails, my front end will also need to know the domain of the emails. And then once it actually knows it, it can connect to it. So this will become here, and then my front end will need to manage this connection, and it will basically need to keep track of all of these endpoints. So once that is done, so what happened, for example, if this is down, or this one, for example, has been updated, we have a lot of orders coming in, and I need to scale this up. So if I scale this up, we might have a different domain. So it could be, for example, payments1.f1.api. So we might have multiple domains here, whatever it is. This will make the work for the front end really complicated because it will need to keep track of all of this communication. If, for example, every single one of these services needs to authenticate, the front end will need to manage the authentication with all of these. So I might have, for example, here a third service which is going to be managing the authentication, and to manage this authentication my front end will need to communicate with it, and then my orders API will need to communicate with it, and then basically you can see here the spider web of this interaction, how it's gonna look and how it's gonna work. So we can see within this, it's not really sustainable having the front end handling all of this communication and storing all of this different data is not really gonna be the best way forward. So what can we do about it? This is where reverse proxy comes into place. So if we take all of this complicated mess that we currently have here, and if we scroll a bit down, so let's see how we can simplify this implementation. So first of all, I'm gonna be removing all of those different lines connecting the front end to all of those different endpoints. I don't really need them. What I can do in order for me to facilitate all of this, so right now, my front end, I don't want it to know about any of this. The way that I can do in order for me to enhance this is to introduce something called a reverse proxy. So a reverse proxy in this place, so I'm going to call it reverse proxy. And the main purpose behind the reverse proxy right now is to handle all of those different routing for all of those different requests coming in. So what I'm doing is I'm delegating the responsibility from the front end to know everything that needs to know about the services to the proxy rather than front end knowing it. So in case the front end wants to send a request, all it needs to know is where is my reverse proxy URL. So for example, for my reverse proxy, I can call it main.api. And for example, right now, if my front end wants to send anything, all it needs to do is just know where is the api.f1.com is. And basically from there, that's all what my proxy will need, my front end will need to know. So any request, the front end will send to the api.f1.com, and once that request hits my main.api or my reverse proxy, then this is going to be the main responsibility for it, to know exactly where it's going to be routing that request. It's going to know exactly where is it going to be sending it. So if it's going to order one, it's going to send it to orders. If it's for payments, it's going to send it to payments. If it's for users, similarly for users, for emails, etc., etc. All of this is going to be handled by this reverse proxy. So what I'm doing here is I'm delegating the responsibility from my front end to a service, which is going to be my reverse proxy, in order for it to handle this. But it's not the only thing. So all of these APIs, in order for me to communicate with them, I need to be authenticated. And in order for me to get authenticated, I need to communicate with my auth API. So what I'm doing as well here, instead of having all of these different communications between my front end, my auth APIs, and those different services that I currently have here with my auth API, what I can do is I can just let my main API communicate with my auth API, get everything when it comes to the authentication authorization, and based on that, I can go to the request. So I'm delegating all of this logic from being stored inside all of these different services to the main proxy here in order for it to run. And this is what we're going to be doing right now. In today's video, we're going to be taking it step by step. We're going to start by the initial step, which is we're going to be seeing how we can actually create this reverse proxy and how are we going to be able to let it map to different services based on what we have. So we can, if a request comes to the main proxy, we're going to be seeing how we can route it to different services. In future videos, we're going to be seeing how we can implement authentication. We're going to be seeing how we can delegate different responsibilities. But for now, just because it's an introduction, we're going to be taking it step by step and starting quite simple. So let's go to the code right now. What I have here is I have 3 different projects, and these 3 different projects are basically my orders API, my payments API. They are completely empty. They are simply a minimal API with a couple of basic endpoints. Whenever you create the project, it comes with it. Nothing has been added, nothing has been installed to it. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be seeing how we can actually create the reverse proxy, how are we going to be wiring it up, and we're going to be adding a customized endpoints to those 2 different APIs. I can even add a third one right now, which is going to be my users API, just to make sure it is consistent with it. So I can add a new project, and this is exactly what I did before. So you can see I went to web and I chose a minimal API, and I called this, I can call it users.api. I can call it whatever I want, and this is what I did. All I did is click on create, and now you can see you have users here added for me, and we can see the different implementation. So that's exactly what I did for the rest. So now basically I have this simple implementation as I have in my diagram. I have my users, payments, and orders. I'm not gonna go to emails right now just to make it simple. So now that I have done this, what I want to do right now is I want to start making my main.api as a reverse proxy. So now if I open my terminal, what do I have? If I type on ls, we can see I have my 4 different projects available for me. In order for it to run as I would like it to be, I would like to open new terminal for every single one of them. So this is going to be 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what I want to do is I want to first of all navigate my main API and then .NET run to my second one, which is going to be orders API and .NET run. The third one is going to be payments API, and lastly it's going to be my users API. So now that I have my 4 application actually running, now what I want to do is I want to start making my main API as the reverse proxy. So in order for me to do so, I'm going to stop my application. I'm going to go to my web browser and I'm going to see YARP. YARP is basically a library that has been created by Microsoft, and the word YARP stands for yet another reverse proxy. So basically whenever Microsoft wanted to work on an internal project, they had a lot of different ideas about reverse proxy, but then they decided to create their own, and this is where YARP came into place, where a bunch of teams from Microsoft came together, created YARP, and then they released it to the public. And I still believe this is what they're using internally to do a lot of the engineering around reverse proxies. But basically right now, we can see here within this documentation, we're going to be seeing how we can actually install YARP inside our machine. And what I want to do is I want to actually use this in order for me to install it. So we can see here, in order for me to start using YARP, I need to utilize this package. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it and I'm going to let's clear this up. I'm going to put .NET package and I'm going to install the YARP reverse proxy. This will take a few seconds. Now that has been installed, I can verify it inside my main.ts. And as we can see here, YARP has been installed and we are on version 2.1. Okay, perfect. So now that I have this installed and now YARP is actually available for me to utilize, what I want to do is I want to actually clear up my application. So inside all of this, I'm going to remove all of the code that I don't need. So just we do a little tidy up. So I'm not going to be needing this summary. Even I'm not going to be needing Swagger here. So I'm going to remove it. I'm going to even remove Swagger from here. So as we can see here, now I have a fully bare-bone minimal API, which doesn't really contain anything right now. So what I want to do is I'm going to start configuring YARP. And the way to do so is after builder, I'm going to add the following. So I have builder.services.reverse proxy. So with this, what I'm doing is I'm adding YARP in order for it to work within my web APIs, within my minimal API here. Then what I need to do is I need to say app map reverse proxy. Okay, great. So now that I have done this, and if I go right now to my terminal and type .NET run, my application will crash. Because what I'm doing here, I have a web API which is going to be running as a reverse proxy, but it does not have any configuration. It does not really need to know, where it's going to be routing any of the requests. So what can I do? So if we go back to the documentation and if we scroll a bit down, we can see here that I need to specify some of the configuration for it. And we can see it's going to be reading it from the app settings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this section inside my app settings. Then what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be adding reading the configuration from it. So if we take a look at this example, we can see here I have my reverse proxy sections, and I'm just going to copy paste it inside my app settings, and we're going to be explaining what's going on here. So now inside my app settings here, we can see that I have added my reverse proxy section. And inside this reverse proxy section, I have two main sections. I have the route section and I have my cluster sections. So what do they mean and how do they work? So let's look at first at routes. So within the route section, we can see here that I have different routes. I have route 1 in this example. I have a cluster ID and I have a match. So what this means is for every single service that I want to connect to. So for example, in this example right now, I have my main proxy communicating with the orders API. So we can think about route 1 is basically my orders route. And the cluster mean here is the different configuration that this route will have in order for it to communicate. So what I'm doing here, I'm telling my main proxy, or basically my main.api, that it needs to know about my orders API. And inside my cluster, I'm defining all of the different domains that is going to be requiring in order for it to work, on top of many other configuration, but this is the simple explanation. So now, in order for me to connect this simple example, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to update this to reflect actual configuration for my application. So instead of route 1, what I'm going to call it is I'm going to call it order route. And for cluster ID, I'm going to change the first cluster to orders, because that's what I'm going to be doing. And for my cluster ID here, I'm going to also put orders. And then what I'm going to do is I need to actually map out my address, because if we take a look at my terminal right now, for my orders one, we can see it's running on port 1595. For my payments, it's running on port 5264, and for my users, it's running on port 5133. So what I want to do is for my orders, I'm just going to copy paste this domain, my local domain, and I'm just going to put it here. And now what I'm doing is basically I'm telling YARP that in order for it to communicate, or basically any request coming for my orders, it has to go to this address. So now this is how I do the initial configuration, but this is not all the configuration. It will still not work, but this is the initial step. So now that I have my initial step here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my program.cs, and I'm going to basically tell, or basically my reverse proxy, how it's going to find this configuration. And the way to do that, all I need to do is put .load from config, and then I'm going to put builder configuration.get section, and I'm going to specify the section that I need to find, which is going to be my reverse proxy section. So now if I run this, now it should be able to work, but it will still not run exactly as it should be. So now we can see that my main API is running on port 5188. So now if I open my Postman and I put my URL here, and it's a GET request for now, and if I do, for example, send, we can see nothing happens. I don't have anything, and I got a 404, nothing is found. If I try to put, for example, /orders as well, nothing will happen, even though I have it inside my configuration here that I have a route to orders, but it will not work. Why? Because right now I'm just doing the configuration. I have not done the forwarding of the request between YARP and or basically my reverse proxy and the services. So what I have done right now is basically I just configured my reverse proxy in order for it to know that these services exist. But I did not teach it, or I did not inform it of how is it gonna be handling the incoming request and how is it gonna be forwarding it to the right service. And this is what I need to do right now. So right now, if I go back to my documentation, if I scroll a bit down, I need to look for something called transforms. And within transforms, basically it tells us it's a request and transform transformation. What it means here is it's gonna transform everything coming from my source, which is gonna be my front end, to the dedicated service. And the way that I do that is pretty straightforward. I'm gonna go to my orders API. I'm gonna clean it up. I'm gonna remove all of this, which we don't really need. I'm gonna delete this. We don't really need it. I'm gonna remove this. We don't really need it. I'm gonna remove Swagger. Actually, let's keep Swagger. We might need it here. And I'm gonna add a new endpoint. And this endpoint is gonna be quite simple. I'm gonna put app.post. And we're gonna define the root for it, which is gonna be, let's say, orders or create, something around those lines. Then I need to specify the context for it. And all I'm gonna say is gonna take a int, which is gonna be the ID of the product. Again, I'm making this up, ID, and it's gonna take a quantity, so another int, a quantity. And all it's gonna do right now, it's gonna return an okay. So we're gonna say it's gonna return a message saying order has been placed. So order for ID with quantity has been placed. Something around those lines. And then once I've done that, in order for me to check it on Swagger, I need to put dot with name and give it create order. And I'm gonna put dot with open API. Simple as that. So now here what I'm doing is basically I'm sending a create order request. And if I run this right now, so if I go to orders, stop this and run it again, we can see here, if I go now to this endpoint, so I'm gonna copy it and open it in my web browser. Actually, I can call it from Swagger. We can see it here. And for the orders, if I click on create, put an ID 1 and put a quantity, let's say 3, send the request. We can see here I got my response. And if I want to make this happen, what I can do, I can just copy this and I can go to Postman, add it here, and it's going to be a post and do a send. And we can see I got my response back as well. Okay, perfect. So now we know that my IP is working. So now what I want to do is whenever I'm calling my endpoint and I post some information, I want it to go directly to YARP, to my orders API. And that's what I'm going to do. So right now, if we go back to I'm going to do right now is I'm going to copy my transform from here and I'm gonna go back to my app settings and I'm gonna add it after the match. So the first thing that I want to do here is I'm gonna remove the query string because I'm not gonna be doing any changes there. I'm gonna be basically right now copy pasting where the request should go. So here we can see it's / remainder. It's not gonna be that. It's gonna be * catch -all. And what I want to do is I want to specify a specific route to hit this root order. So I'm gonna put here is I'm gonna put / orders. And now once I have done that, I can stop my application and I'm gonna run it again. And now I should be able to have the same request that I have done in Postman, which is this one here. I want to be able to call it from the YARP code in order for it to run. So right now, what I need to do first, we know that one is a post. I need to change it to a post. Then what I need to do is I need to put / orders because that's the endpoint that I said here. And then if we take a look here, the endpoint inside of it, it's going to be create. So I'm going to copy paste all of this and I'm going to put it here / create. So now what I have here is I have my based endpoint, but I am calling the orders API through it. So if I click on send, we can see I got a 200 and I got my response, which is the exact response that I got from here. So with this, what I was able to do is basically I was able to route the requests directly from my main to my orders using this IP here, or basically this domain here. I'm not directly calling the orders endpoint or my local host, whatever it is. What I'm doing is I'm calling my main API, and my main API is directly forwarding the request to whatever it needs to go. So now if I want to add the same thing, for example, for payments, what I can do is first of all inside my routes where I have my orders, I can just copy this, call this payments route or payment route. And then here I need to specify the cluster ID, which is going to be payments. I need to create this new cluster. So I'm just going to copy paste this, add a new comma, paste it here and call this payments. And I need to specify the payments URL. So I can go back to my terminal, go to the payments section. This is my orders. Here is my payments. Copy this endpoint and add it here. I'm gonna remove this. And the next step that I need to do is for payments, rather than having orders, I'm gonna put payments, and now this should be able to work. So what I'm gonna do also, I'm gonna go to payments, go to my payments.cs, program.cs. I'm gonna do another cleanup here. So I'm gonna remove the summary. I'm gonna update, I'm gonna remove this record, but I'm gonna update that endpoint, and I'm gonna keep Swagger. So instead of having it a weather forecast, I'm just gonna say payment status, for example. So I'm gonna put payment status, and it can take, for example, an order ID. So, and for example, order ID. And all I'm gonna be returning here is I'm gonna put return payment has completed successfully for, and I specify here the order ID, and that's it. And I'm gonna change this here to payment status as well. Actually, just status without payments, just to make it more streamlined. So just status. I'm gonna also put it here. So now if I go back to my terminal, stop my payments, run it again, and now go to my Swagger interface for this. So if I go back to my web browser, open Swagger for it, we can see the status. If I try it out, click order ID 1, we'll be able to see the payment has successful. So I'm just gonna try this again in Postman, copy this, go to Postman, create a new simple request. This is a get now, and I'm just going to remove this and click on send. We should be able to get my response. Okay, great. So now what I want to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to go back to YARP. So rather than having orders / create, I need to change this first to get because it's a get request. And I'm going to put here payments, and then I'm going to remove the old request and put the new one, status for order 1. And click on send, and we can see I got the response back as it is. So now what I have done is I was successfully able to map these three together. I can do it for the rest, but we're just repeating the same thing. But this is a simple implementation of how we can actually create a reverse proxy with YARP and actually map it to different microservices that you are utilizing in the background to support your application. So this has been a very quick video on how we can actually utilize YARP and how we can integrate it with different .NET microservices, how we can actually configure it, how we can forward the request, and how we can manage it. If you have any questions, please make sure you put them in the comments down below. If you'd like to support me, please consider supporting me on Patreon or buying me a coffee. If you'd like to have access to the source code, please make sure you support me on Patreon. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.